Today we'll be talking about how to take notes for writing a research paper. But first I want you to do a little thinking. How could being organized as you conduct research impact your process for writing a research paper? Pause the video to think about this question. Hopefully you realize that if you're organized as you conduct research, you'll be able to research more quickly, efficiently, and effectively, and you'll be able to keep track of the information you find so that you can use it when you need it. So we're going to learn a note-taking system today, and there are different ways that you could take notes, but for English 2 we're going to follow the system because it's a good foundation for taking notes in the future as you research. So for this system, you will need either 3x5 index cards, or you may use Google Slides or Notely for taking notes. If you use Notely, you will need to create an account and make sure you remember your username and password. I highly recommend the 3x5 index cards, but if you do know that you tend to lose stuff, that maybe isn't the best choice for you. And as we go through today, you'll see why we use one of these three things. So as you take notes, you're going to give each source a number or symbol. If you use numbers, a packet that you are filling out online, your workspace document already has locations for you to put your sources, and they are already numbered. But if you would rather use a symbol of some sort, you may. You'll write the number or symbol on each note card to show where the source comes from. And you will write the main idea of the card as a heading at the top. This is also called a slug line and gives you an idea of the subject of each card. And this slug line is optional. What you're going to do is, as you read articles, you're going to write one idea on each card or each slide or each note, and you will only write on one side of the card. If you get the information from a source with page numbers, then you'll also write the page number that the information came from. So let's take a look here at an example. So imagine you're researching the decline of the bee population in North America. So you find the source, and then you evaluate the credibility of the source, and you determine that it's credible and useful for your paper. Well, now you need to take information from the source so that it's available to you when you write the paper. So you find a piece of information from the source and you write it on a note card. One piece of information goes on the card. Now this number 1 right here shows that the information came from source number 1. So then anytime you write a card with information from this source, you will put a 1 on it so that you know it came from here without having to write this whole long title or the author's name on every single card you write. So this symbol or number, whatever you choose to show that the information came from this source, actually makes it faster to take notes. So let's break this down a little bit more. So this 1 indicates that the information came from source number 1. Now if you found a second source and got information from that source, this number would be a 2. If you had 5 sources, found information from your 5th source, this number would be a 5. This part here is the piece of information that came from a source. Only put one piece of information per card. You'll find out more about why on that later. One piece of information per card. If you can come up with a main idea for the card, you can put that at the top. That's called a slug line. This piece is optional. Sometimes it's easy to know what to put up there, sometimes it's not. Most of your sources will probably be online, so they won't have page numbers, but if they do have a page number here, page number, write it on your card so that when you do in-text citations later, you can include that information because it's necessary. So like I said before, you can do index cards You could do Google Slides, or you could do Notely, which is basically an online bulletin board. So it's like using sticky notes, which you can move around and use. And the reason we have one piece of information per card is so that we can organize it after we take all our notes. Because once you finish taking your notes, you will physically organize the information by topics, not by sources. Because we don't want our paper to have a paragraph about source 1, and a paragraph about source 2, paragraph about source 3. That's not a good research paper. Instead, we'll have it arranged by topics. So with the decline of the bee population topic, you might have a paragraph about the numbers and how the bee population is declining, how fast it's declining, where it's declining most. Then you might have a paragraph about pesticides being one cause of the bee population decline. You might have loss of habitat being another cause of the decline. You might have another paragraph about the effects of the decline of bee population. So after you've gotten all your notes taken, you can organize those cards into those piles in order to be able to write a more organized paper. And later on, we will have a mini lesson about how to sort your note cards effectively. But for now, it's important to take good notes so that you have that good information for that step of organization. So what advantages does this note-taking system have over writing notes on notebook paper or in a Word document? And try to use the word impact in your discussion. Pause your video so that you have time to think about and discuss this question. One advantage of this note-taking system over writing notes on notebook paper or in a Word document is that you can physically move around your ideas, and that can help you create a more organized paper, and you can possibly see how ideas fit together better. If you use notebook paper, you can't physically move the ideas around. That's not to say you can't organize your ideas. There are other things that you can do, but visually seeing how your ideas can go from separate pieces of information from all different sources to how they connect to each other can be really useful, especially as you're learning how to write a research paper. So we covered how to take the notes, but you also need to know what should be on the note cards. So how do you know what information should go on each card? You should put information that answers your research question or that you feel is important to include in your research paper. So knowing what your narrowed topic is or having a research question can help you figure out what's relevant and what's not. And it's okay if you take more notes than what you use in a paper. Whenever I wrote research papers, I always had note cards left over that I didn't use, and that was okay because I don't always know what direction my paper will go in when I'm taking notes and doing that original research. So there are different things you could write on your note cards. You could do quotations, paraphrases, and summaries. So for quotations, you're copying part of the source word for word exactly how it's written. Put big quotation marks on these cards. If you don't, then you might not see those when you're typing your draft and not put those in your paper, which can lead to plagiarism, cause problems. You can also write paraphrases, which, as you know, is writing a small section of the source in your own words. Or you can write summaries. You can write the main idea from a larger portion of the text, once again, in your own words. So when should you use each of these? So use quotes when the original wording is powerful and or can't be paraphrased. Sometimes students will find a list of things and can't paraphrase it well. That would be a good choice for quoting then. You should use paraphrases when the ideas are really important, but the exact wording is not. and use a summary when the main idea is important, but the details aren't. So figure out what is most important about the information you find, and then you can pick which one of these to use. And when you're writing notes, you can always change your mind later. So for example, if you write down a quote when you're taking notes, you can paraphrase that later. That's fine. And remember, you can have a maximum of 4 quotes in your final draft. Well, you might use a lot of quotes when you take notes. It's up to you. So let's take a look at some sample note cards. We'll imagine that our research question is, how has today's technology impacted runners? So I'd like you to pause the video and take a minute to look at this note card and then talk about whether or not it is a good note card considering this research question. So as you can see, we do have the correct parts of the note card. We know it's from source 3. Smartphone distraction gives us the main idea of this note card. However, the quote's pretty long, so it would probably be best to paraphrase this information and pick out only what's most important. But you might do that later on in the process, and that's okay. Let's take a look at this note card. Consider the same research question. Pause the video and think about whether or not this is a good note card. This information is irrelevant to the research question. Also, the card number is missing. So when you get later on in the process and you have to write a draft, if you can't tell where the information comes from, you can't use it because you can't cite it, and that would be plagiarism. But I also want you to notice that this partial quote here is okay. You can paraphrase parts and then quote a little bit, and that's a good way to use information from a source as long as it's relevant and as long as you know where the information comes from. I'll take a look at this note card. Is this a good card considering our research question? Why or why not? Pause the video to think about it. This is a good note card. We do know what source the information came from. We do have a main idea at the top. Remember, this is optional. We have one piece of information, and it is related to our research question. So that was a little bit about taking notes for research writing. If you have any questions, please ask someone in the class or find time to talk to Mrs. Wiersma.